morning sun, flying high in the sky till the day is done. I can't break away. Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why. I can't break away. Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. No, I can't break away. I can't break away. No, I can't break away. I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
That one got me backfired. That music that played halfway through the intro is an on-speak that's been sitting on CF Live for like 2 months, man. And he chose now to be the first time to open his mouth in my stream, and it played during the intro. GG, welcome to the Season 1 finale of Fixer's Heavy Metal History. So, 13 months ago, we started this journey with a look at the broken Ancien regime. And tonight, we will hit what is one of the 3 places you can stop a conversation on the French Revolution. But before we get to all of that, as I said in text on the way in, this is going to be a little bit longer, just because it's going to be a look back as well. And before we get going, I have to thank a lot of people. 3 years, including the past year of streaming, is what went into this for me. So I have to take a minute and just say some thanks. First off to my uncle, who, when I was like 3 or 4 years old, put the first history books I can remember in front of me and got me going. And then to my grandma, who I called Bobchi, who passed away right when I joined the military, who never hesitated. Every time we went to the mall, there was a Walden bookstore. And every time we went there, I'd find some book I wanted, some obscure, a lot of times history book, and she would buy it. No questions asked, and I would read it. In 3rd grade, I was tasked with a report on a person that I most admired. And the teacher that year, my 3rd grade teacher, was Miss Prestia, and she looked at me a little oddly after everyone came up with their reports on their moms and their dads and their favorite baseball and football players, when I stepped up to talk about Manfred von Richthofen in 3rd grade. That's the Red Baron. And after I was done with the report and we were kind of gone for the day and walking out, she pulled me aside and she said that I was way ahead on my history studies, and she encouraged me to just keep going. I read and read and read history growing up. But then I moved into my adulthood and then my life here with my friends in the Outlaws community, and you guys all started to toss around the idea of me presenting a history series as a subject matter for streaming. After you guys started to learn that a lot of the facts, I was correcting a lot of the facts behind, history-based video games to set the record straight over and over and over again. Dustin was particularly encouraging to me in this regard every morning whenever I would tear apart something in some video game, and he would say something along the lines of, you should just do something on this. You should, record a podcast. And it evolved into the idea of streaming Fixer's Heavy Metal History. And I made a logo for it that year in 2018, and that logo sat because everyone didn't think I was going to do it. Along the way to this point, no one person has supported me more.
Oh, yeah, buddy.
No one person has supported me more than Mads, mentally. I've run countless ideas past her, And she's kept me honest on time schedules with the episodes, while also saying, hey, you should go actually take care of your real life, life. I've been promoted twice at my job during this season, and the last one was to a much more complicated and political role. And without my best friend, I wouldn't have kept pace through that. And then especially when my dad had emergency surgery in April, and all of you were amazing during that time as well. The Tier 2 and Tier 3 subs deserve a special mention because they have seriously, and I mean seriously, offset the cost of maps and other materials that I've had to buy. Books. I take the money from the Tier 2 and Tier 3 subs and I run it right into this stream to pay for licenses for the software I use, to buy books, to buy maps. And I buy probably 2 or 3 maps a week, most weeks. So we're going to keep needing those maps. And I'm not even reading chat right now. Sorry. I'll scroll back up in a minute. But the Tier 2, Tier 3 subs, especially in that group, are Doc, Manny, and Sai, who have been pretty consistent in there with making sure they hit to my wallet to get materials for this series does not hit me too hard. Books can get expensive. Ready? I really appreciate that. Speaking of Manny, no single person has been more generous during this with their charitable support. Manny, at the start of this show, dropped 10 subs on us. Berlin has been huge in my streaming too along the way. So to the both of you, thank you very much for all the just generosity. There's been donations from other people, but I really wanted to call out those two guys. They've done a lot. They've put a lot of money into the causes that we support. Many of you have been here live almost every weekend for a year. Gillian Rocket especially. They've been here the most. Easily, I can see it in the chat the most. They duke it out every week in these quizzes for 13 months, and they have been a humongous factor. Their constancy has been a factor in my motivation. The fact that I really want to deliver something good for the people who are consuming this live every week. And then he's in chat tonight, thank God. CF Live. I can't express enough how much I appreciate the fact that CF, 1, takes all my crap in his own stream, but 2, he has been receptive at every turn to me saying, I need a song for this, or I need music for this. He turned around the Walk Like an Egyptian thing in a day for me. Every time I need something, he is just there musically to provide something that I need. And he also is a huge booster of the series in his own streams. He just constantly asks me, what's this week? How's everything going? I can see it everywhere I post something. Every time I say it's done, every time I post to Twitter, he's the one that, I always see liking that post and helping whatever algorithms out there are helping me bring people here. Yeah, CF Live, I'll do anything you guys want. But on top of that, Diggity and Max chipped in on the music as well. They deserve to be recognized for the talent they put into helping us with aspects of the show. It's simply impossible to mention everybody by name. Yes, thanks is necessary, CF. It's impossible to mention everybody by name, and I've obviously missed people. The Big Top Outlaws community encompasses most of you, but I did want to take them a moment to say thank you. But then finally, how did this come to be? I've mentioned this in passing in places, but in 2018, a group of my friends called the Big Top Outlaws jokingly but not jokingly suggested I stream history. And I mulled that challenge over for a little bit and spent a few weeks trying to figure out where to start. Where was the best place to explain how the modern world came to be? Because that's really what I wanted to do with this series. And after some time, I landed on Lazare Carnot's Levée en Masse, which we've talked about in this season, as it defines the beginning of rampant military industrialization of every Western nation. I couldn't start there. I needed to explain why that thing became a thing. So we had to start at the beginning with a bankrupt French nation and a king who didn't have the backbone to do anything about it. So began 2 years of reading de Tocqueville and biographies on all the famous names that you've heard me talk about throughout this entire season. And believe it or not, I did not know that much about the French Revolution. I knew its core storyline, I knew the major points, I knew the major players, but that wasn't enough to present this to you. So I read for like 2 years. I read and I listened to lectures, and I just became educated. And I finally felt I was ready in about early 2020, and began to pull the curtain back on the idea that no, I was not joking, and that Fixer's heavy metal history was actually going to be a thing. Writing an episode for this season has largely been done in 3 writing sessions, starting on a Monday, and total writing time is about 8 to 10 hours per episode. I follow a flow outline that governs like the whole idea, like a table of contents that takes me point to point, that let me tie all the threads together as the episodes move on. That's what I'm going to be doing during the 6-week break that's going to be between now and season 2. I'm going to be coming up with a flow outline to talk to you guys about the Napoleonic Empire. But after each episode is written, I take the names which I highlight in the writing and I build them along with maps, which sometimes take me up to 6 hours to make if they're custom, and I make them into a whiteboard like this one. And I take the portraits and everything goes together there, and I do a custom intro. Every intro for every episode has been custom done so that you guys have at least the names spelled in front of you every week. So as you roll into the episode, you know which people that I mentioned you should really be focusing on. The point is that it's a pretty massive lift to get this produced every week. And somehow we've managed to do 45 episodes in 56 weeks with everything going on around the world and in my life. The experience of doing all of this for all of us over the past 3 years has been something else. And thank you everyone who's here tonight and everyone who's watched on YouTube and everyone who's supported me and encouraged me and just come along for the ride. I've never felt up to this point that I was more than just a student of history. But after this body of work, that is a significant thing that I've done in my life, I no longer really feel like I'm some sort of imposter fanboy of the past. I have started to feel like I'm an authority, and I would not have reached that point in my confidence to speak on these facts, not just to you guys, but to the highly educated. And I really am thankful for that. So, we're 15 minutes into a stream and we should be talking about history. So yes, that's a lot of people on that board tonight. I have tried to make this easy to follow. This is a complicated ending. The red border that rolls across the top of your screen from Moreau to Ducos, left to right, those are your conspirators. The people that have blue backgrounds, those are your current directors. So as we go through the night, all of these names will get mentioned. The big names are across the top. And so we've amazingly reached the end of our journey through the French Revolution. And again, we've been on this journey since May 22nd, 2021. That's about 13 months, 45 episodes, 110 spoken hours, and an investiture of 3 years of my life to bring this to all of us. Today, the directory will be overthrown, and Napoleon Bonaparte will come to power. There are a lot of places that one could date the end of the French Revolution. Thanks, no. The coup of Thermidor, which toppled Robespierre, might have actually been the right place to stop this season, with the directory being season 2 of this series, because it's been a solid, 15 or so episodes in the directory's time frame. The coming referendum in season 2 in 1802, which makes Napoleon Bonaparte First Consul for life before he's ever emperor, is another good candidate. But it also strays into his absolute power period, which is more synonymous with Napoleonic than it is revolutionary. The crowning of Napoleon I, Emperor of France in 1804, is also another logical place to draw a line, but again, he will have already been in de facto power in France, ultimately supreme power, for some time. And so I decided to break this up as I moved probably to the midpoint of the season at this line, the coup of 18 Brumaire. So we're ending it here, which will bring Bonaparte to power for the first time, and after all of these episodes and possible end dates, I do feel this is the correct end of revolutionary France, even though it's kind of been directorial Republican France for a little bit. So in the summer of 1799, the French Republic was facing crisis that they hadn't seen since the very dark days. Remember to clonk that follow button. Since the very dark days of 1793. As we have been talking about, the French armies were losing everywhere, in Italy and in Switzerland, and an invasion of France not only seemed possible, but really probable. That point right there, Dustin, the silly calendar, this will be the last episode that I reference the Republican calendar. It will stick around legally until 1806, but Napoleon won't use it that much. He'll use it, but he won't. And so I will convert us back to strictly being on the Gregorian Julian calendar as we start season 2. But things in this era are named after that calendar, so they had to be referenced. And everyone's like, woohoo! It's been super confusing. Not only the potential for an invasion, but taxes and conscription were leading to domestic unrest and uprisings against the central directorial government. These were uprisings that were being egged on by royalist agitators who, believe it or not, still held out hope of ending this whole Republican revolutionary experiment and bringing it to its knees. The response coming from Paris did echo the response that we saw to that other great crisis in 1793. Again, Neo-Jacobinism is on the rise again, and it has come to power in the legislative councils, albeit temporarily after the coup of Floreal. We have a de facto levée en masse reestablished now to fight in the war of the Second Coalition. Nobles and emigres all over France are again facing summary persecution from the government. And the central government of France was simply hemorrhaging legitimacy. And the talk of another great revolution to replace the Directory is in the air. And by the end of the year, 1799, the central government, the French Directory, will be overthrown. It just won't be by the radical leftist revolutionaries everyone thought was going to do it. It's going to come from a clique, people in the red box on your screen, a clique of authoritarians who did not see the future of France as one of liberty and democracy, but one of power and order. So during the summer of 1799, Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, now the dominant person in the Directory, was already organizing to nip any nascent left-wing radical planning from the Jacobins in the bud. And on July 20th, 1799, he and his new ally, Paul Barras, contrived to appoint Joseph Fouché, hopefully his picture's familiar to you, as the new Minister of Police for the Directory. That's a ministerial level position, just like Minister of War and Minister of Finance. Hopefully you remember Fouché, because I made a point when I introduced him of telling you that he is the ultimate survivor. He was one of the leaders of dechristianization, and he played a major role in deploying the Reign of Terror in Lyon. But this ultimate survivor has now restyled himself as a Thermidorian-style moderate, opposed to radical Jacobinism, which at one time he helped, enable and facilitate. So on August 13th, the new Minister of Police decided that the Menage Club, that new Jacobin club that was meeting in the old meeting place of all the assemblies, that it had to go. It was already boasting about 3,000 members, and it was a threat to public safety. So he first ordered the club to vacate the Menage, which that makes sense. That's kind of a state building. But then a couple of days later, he just straight outlawed the Menage Club and broke up whatever organizing body that the Neo-Jacobins had. But then, a few days later after that, the moderates in the legislative councils kind of came back and tossed out, if you remember, those indictments of all those directors who got ousted last week whenever Sieyès came to power. They were indicted for being corrupt, and the moderates kind of pulled back against the Neo-Jacobins and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to reinstate them, but we're not going to prosecute them. And so the Neo-Jacobins started to lose ground very quickly. We discussed how they had already hit their high point as they went through the summer last episode. But then the events in France and in Paris got beyond the control of Sieyès and Barras to begin to undermine their efforts. In August, Paris would be told that anti-conscription peasant uprisings were breaking out like everywhere. They would also find out that General Joubert, who I do have pictured, had been killed while getting beat by the Austrians and the Russians at the Battle of Novi. That's when they were trying to get out of the Alps, down to Liguria. they would also find out in August that the British and the Russians had invaded the Batavian Republic. That's the Netherlands. Now, we dealt with Joubert last week in episode 1.44, and how General Suvorov was then ordered subsequently to not pursue what was left of the French army. So he didn't finish the job in Liguria, and how that was going to be a mistake. So we're going to focus on the other two threats. Barthélemy Joubert is already dead. But he's on the board tonight for a reason we're going to get to later on. So the Directory had already been dealt a blow with that full-blown peasant uprising that happened in Belgium over conscription. And though that uprising had been really, in the grand scheme of things, pretty quickly suppressed, yeah, it is one of the great what-if-he-had-lived moments. There's a couple of those what-if moments tonight. But the sentiment out in Belgium was still pretty thick with resentment about the fact that they are being conscripted by their oppressors to then fight in a war on behalf of their oppressors. This is one of the reasons this overarching anti-conscription sentiment, especially out in the territories that France had acquired or their sister republics, that gave the British and the Russians a feeling of supreme confidence about invading the Netherlands in 1799. Through the spring and summer of 1799, resistance of the draft then just spread widely all over France. And the royalists, who, as I said in our intro, were still holding on to some faint hope that they were going to turn this whole thing around, still started to exploit it. It goes without saying that out in the western departments, out near the Vendée, the old networks from the Chouan and the Catholic and Royal Army started to kind of reform and reconnect because conscription was one of their big things they hated. And scattered guerrilla raids and ambushes that started to occur signaled a possible return to civil war out in the west. But the hottest bed of resistance in 1799 turned out to be way down in the very southwest around the city of Toulouse. At the beginning of August, a peasant mob, fully 10,000 strong, organized and started rampaging around the countryside in opposition to conscription. But the mob in Toulouse didn't have everything going for it, because Toulouse itself had always been a really strong Jacobin stronghold, so the city's far better equipped, trained, and led National Guard units just were able to come out, march around, and put an end to this 10,000 strong uprising at the end of the month. And that's about as bad as the uprisings really got. And within weeks of finding out that an entire department was in revolt, Paris then learned that it really wasn't anymore. That was good news, but also bad news for the dictatorial regime. Putting down peasant uprisings is good news. But it was worrisome that it had been suppressed by the left wing, by the neo-Jacobins, and not centrist moderates. That there was enough power in a place like Toulouse that, the Jacobins can control that level of military authority again. That's not great. And no sooner had this good news, bad news come to Paris before the Directory received really bad news. The Allied victories in Italy and Switzerland had given the Second Coalition enormous boosts to their confidence, so much so that the British and Russians had decided to launch this joint invasion into the Batavian Republic. Bringing the Netherlands back to the British sphere of influence has always been the war aim of the British. It's basically why they kept fighting alone. And the Dutch had been pretty much their only goal since all this war talk started back in 1792. The British were, remember, just all about keeping the Netherlands out of French hands, out of French influence. In the larger strategic picture, an attack on France by invading the Netherlands would also open up a new front in the War of the Second Coalition, which would prevent the French from effectively reinforcing the armies that were losing down in the Alps and down in Liguria, and also hopefully prevent them from dealing with this spreading domestic unrest. So the Russians signed up and said, let's go do it with the British. The belief inside the British ministry was that the French occupation of the Netherlands was really unpopular, and that any force that landed would be greeted as liberators by the Dutch. So a deal was struck between Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger and Tsar Paul I. In exchange for a boatload of British money, the Russians would provide 17,000 troops to augment the British expeditionary force of about 13 to 20,000 strong. Numbers vary in documents. In their joint minds, they would invade the Batavian Republic and evict the French without breaking a sweat. But that's not how it's going to go. As I mentioned in episode 1.40, the Dutch were not entirely enthused about their burdensome alliance with the French, but they were even less interested in welcoming back British-backed William Prince of Orange, who you will recall is an even stricter conservative than the Comte de Provence, they currently claiming to be Louis XVIII. And William of Orange had indeed become more reactionary than the exiled king Louis XVIII. And he was promising upon his return to the Netherlands to restore the old Orangist monarchy in its entirety, and to exact reprisals on anyone who had helped boot him out of his country. And King Louis XVIII, when he comes to power in the Bourbon Restoration, he's going to do the same exact thing. These guys are going to come sweeping back in, and their policy effectively is, once I get my throne back, everybody's going to pay. That's not a really great selling point. Hey, those of you who had anything to do with this period of time where I wasn't in power, retribution's coming your way if I somehow find my way back to the throne. Who's going to support that except for the extreme conservatives? The British were not aware of this problem with William Prince of Orange, with his, I'm going to come back and curb stomp anybody who ever did anything wrong to me and reimpose everything about the Orangist monarchy that everybody hated in the Netherlands. The British didn't know about it, because they were getting their intelligence from agents of William Prince of Orange, who were feeding them everything that the British needed to hear. Oh yeah, we get there and we'll be welcomed as liberators. That wasn't going to happen. These agents of William Prince of Orange were spinning nothing but lies back to the British about how the Dutch were ready to rise up against the French and welcome William back home. None of that's true. So full of optimism about the prospect here, the British sailed advanced units down towards the port of Den Helder, which we've talked about in the past, at the end of August 1799. And the initial British optimism was reinforced when the Dutch fleet that met them, which should have been preventing a landing by the British, just said, go on in. We're not going to stand in your way. And they let the British pass. On August 27, 1799, the British established a beachhead, and 3 days after, the crews of that Dutch fleet, who had let everybody go by, they mutinied, and they defected. The entire fleet defected to the Allies. You can kind of see why the British would be optimistic, as it did work for them with Charles I and Charles II. Yeah, it's not going to work here, though. And it's more about the fact that the Dutch didn't want anything to do with a king. So that Dutch fleet mutinied. But the demoralized Dutch sailors who mutinied because they wanted no part of the fighting, it didn't reflect the general attitude of their countrymen, as the British and the Russians were about to find out. Opposing this British and soon-to-be Russian army was a Dutch army of about 20,000 strong, backed by an additional French occupation force of 15,000. That was, if you'll remember, the army that was supposed to be 25,000, and the Dutch were still paying for it to be 25,000, but it's still just 15,000. Yeah, that force. Not knowing where the British planned to land, these Dutch and French forces were spread out all along the coast. And it took a few days for them to realize where the landing had occurred and to concentrate, once the British had put in at Den Helder. Even when they did get concentrated, they were beaten at Krabendam on September 10th, which paved the way for the Russians to land their half of the army and provide additional supply and reinforcements overall to the British. By the second week of September 1799, the combined British-Russian force in the Netherlands numbered about 40,000, which is, just a little bit more than the Dutch and the French have. Back in Paris, this new crisis triggered a showdown between the resurgent Neo-Jacobins and the more moderate leaders of the Thermidorian variety, who were both appalled and terrified that the left was getting ready to drag France back into the horrors of year 2, the Reign of Terror. And this battle culminated with a proposal by General Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, who again is a member of the Council of 500 as well. And Jourdan is, obviously really annoyed with the Directory for mismanaging the war and, constantly sending him personally out there to lose. So he was pretty firmly allied with the Neo-Jacobin opposition to the Directory at this point. And so, on September 13th, Jourdan rose and proposed that the councils declare the country to be in danger, just like the Legislative Assembly had done in 1792. The person you always bet against. For now, this is one of those things. Remember the reason why the Constitution of 1793 was never used? The nation's in danger. We need the Committee of Public Safety. And they never used it. Jourdan stands up and says the same thing, that the country's in danger. And then kept going and said if the council so declared, the normal constitution would be suspended. That's the one that keeps the Directory in business. And emergency powers would go into effect. The Neo-Jacobins said this was an absolutely necessary step if France was going to survive. That the old revolutionary spirit needed to be renewed, according to them, and that nothing should be permitted to stand in the way of that new, renewed revolutionary spirit. Now, I don't know how anybody at this point doesn't go, by renewed revolutionary spirit, you can't mean anything else than just like what it was during the Reign of Terror. So the moderate center wasn't convinced by the argument. Emergency powers had been necessary back then because France did not have a stable constitution, they said. France has one now, and the moderates said we should probably let it do its job. Thank you very much, Loud Engine. Everyone in the Directory had the power and the authority needed to rally the nation to victory, and the moderates said that the legislative councils needed to let those with that power, do their jobs. Yeah, everyday man, I don't see how that's not the reaction, Rocket. How did the everyday man or the even close to centrists not go, oh God, not again? Plus, in case you forgot, it was the declaration that the country was in danger which led to the insurrection of August the 10th, which killed the king and ended the monarchy. And then it led to the September massacres and then the Reign of Terror. And the moderates wanted nothing to do with those days. So when the vote was taken the next day, the memory of those darkest days of the revolution did prevail. And in the Council of 500, the motion was defeated, 245 to 171. Then, as luck would have it, the moderates were proven entirely correct, and that emergency powers were not needed to win the war. Just as spring and summer had brought nothing but bad news from all the fronts for the French armies, the fall would bring nothing but good news. And we'll keep going with the invasion of the Batavian Republic as fortunes turn, because up in the Netherlands, this invasion by the British and the Russians was already starting to stall out. Despite their hefty numerical advantage, or maybe because of it, the British and the Russians were having trouble coordinating with each other. Part of that's probably due to the size of their armies. Probably part of it is they had never really worked together before. They were sweeping south across a pretty wide front, and as they moved, they weren't demonstrating particularly strong discipline or coordination. On top of that, large parts of the countryside were starting to flood because it's below sea level, and seasonally that does happen. And so the supply lines supporting the British and the Russians became pretty treacherous, or they were washed out completely, or they were just impassable. And then the kicker, the obvious one. The Dutch weren't rallying to support them like the British thought. And instead, they started to rally to the French side against the British. That Franco-Dutch army of 35,000 or so scored a victory at Bergen on September 18th, and then fought the Allies to a draw at Alkmaar on October 2nd. Though they did leave the field and left it in strategic command of the British and the Russians, so technically they lost in terms of how history writes these things down, but it was a draw. They just withdrew and left the field to their enemy. But there wasn't any gain made strategically by either side. That's a draw. But that draw at Alkmaar set up what turned out to be the decisive battle up in the Netherlands at Castricum on October 6th, only 4 days later. At Castricum, after an all-day fight, the British and Russians were actually broken into a very chaotic retreat. The retreat, yeah, I assume translators will be needed for sure. And anytime these armies coordinate, the troops aren't, multilingual, so it depends on how down the multilingual nature of your commanders goes. But at some point, yeah, translators are needed. But again, at Castricum, all-day fighting, and then the Russians and the British break. And it was a really bad break. It was so bad that it led to a strategic retreat by the combined force all the way back to the beachhead at Den Helder. And then when they got there, the weather, as it comes back again, took a really bad turn, which made getting any supplies and reinforcements to that army, now basically out of land at Den Helder, pretty impossible, because the North Sea was just disgusting. They couldn't get any ships in there. With neither side here looking to get bogged down in some sort of siege while they held up in Den Helder through the winter, the British and French negotiated an agreement that allowed the Allied forces to withdraw under pretty favorable terms, including they got to keep those Dutch ships that mutinied. This agreement was signed on October 18th. And the Allies, just as quickly as they had come in, started to pull right back out of the Netherlands. And this brief Russo-Anglo invasion of the Batavian Republic was over. Meanwhile, down in Switzerland, the French were about to enjoy a similar run of successes. As a consequence of the invasion, now failed invasion, of the Batavian Republic, the Austrian and Russian forces down in Switzerland and Italy were getting shuffled around, much to the dread of their two best commanders, Archduke Charles and Alexander Suvorov. Remember, Suvorov wanted to finish the deal down in the Ligurian Alps, and he was told to turn around. I'm going to explain why that happened now. Yes, it was favorable terms, but it was a beat. They were beaten, for sure, whenever the British and the Russians pulled out. So again, Charles and Suvorov are going, when that first order comes down to stop pursuing the French all the way out of Italy and maybe back into France, which would have been a sensible place to open up a front. And Suvorov wasn't happy about it. Charles wasn't either. In mid-August, so backing up a couple of months, new orders had come in from the Austrian High Command. Archduke Charles was to withdraw the bulk of his army from Switzerland, the one that had just taken Zurich, and let, Andre Massena go. Yeah, he was told to withdraw that army, to move them north to anchor the Rhineland, basically the flank for the invasion of the Netherlands. Yep, Rocket, that's what happened. It left behind, when Charles pulled out, about 25,000 Austrians, about 30,000 Russians, to just hold all of Switzerland. And then to replace Charles's army, you'll recall that Suvorov was ordered to stop his attack on the French in Liguria along the Italian coast because he was coming back north to replace Charles. So you have this situation where Charles is ordered to leave and Suvorov is ordered to go in there and replace him. I sure hope they do that, wait till one gets there before the other one leaves. But that's not what the orders from the high command said. They told them both to start marching immediately. Neither commander was happy about this. And Charles, literally intentionally drug his feet for as long as he could, delaying as long as possible before he left Zurich. His entirely justified concern, which I just hopefully foreshadowed well enough, was that French General Andre Massena had, regathered a force. He didn't agree to stop fighting. He left. And he's coming back with 80,000 men. Since that negotiated retreat from Zurich, and the window between Charles leaving and Suvorov arriving would leave Massena with a local numerical advantage.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
As until Suvorov got up there would only be about 50,000 Russians and Austrians defending Switzerland. Let alone would they concentrate in Zurich. So when Charles did leave, Massena did exactly what Charles feared. He noticed this numerical disparity immediately and started drawing up quick plans to retake Zurich. On September 25th, Massena led his force in an attack on the city and found the Russian defenders were simply overconfident. And who can blame them a little, maybe a little, considering they had just boot-stomped France for half a year. But they were overconfident, and they were unprepared. They'd gotten lazy real quick. What are the Austrian high command smoking and drinking? I don't know, but I'd like some. But the Russians had gotten cocky and had gotten lax. And just like in the Batavian Republic, coordination between the Russians and the Austrians was also really bad. In the absence of one of these two very capable commanders, the commander that was kind of the temporary guy it was in over his head trying to keep these two armies working together. And so as Massena pushes in and heavy fighting ensues, the French were able to push the Allied force in front of them back inside of Zurich itself. And then the very next day, the French kicked them out of the city. Really sent them running in chaos and confusion. In this fight with Massena, of the 50,000 or so troops that were scattered all over the place, and they weren't all concentrated at Zurich, the Allies lost 13,000 troops killed, captured, or wounded. And the Russians had seriously thrown it in reverse at this point. They were flying out of the mountains back toward Austria. Meanwhile, Suvorov was just now, as Zurich was falling, starting his push north to reinforce Zurich, only to find out that it had already been taken by the French, who were now pivoting south to trap Suvorov in the mountains where he couldn't maneuver. Now, Suvorov, again, very capable commander, saw it coming, was able to slip that trap. But he was forced to go on a fairly wide, exhausted march through what are now snow-covered Alps to escape. His men were just beat, exhausted, starving, frostbitten when they came out on the other side, the northern side of the Alps. It's about this time that Tsar Paul gets word that his two armies in the west were in full retreat pretty much at the same moment. That the force that was supposed to be defending Zurich's on the run, and that Suvorov didn't have much of a choice and he's running out of the mountains. Just about the time that he got the news that the invasion of the Netherlands had also gone nowhere. But it was more that his great armies in Switzerland and Italy, who had appeared to be unstoppable and steamrolling the French, were just now in a bloody, broken, and exhausted retreat. And who does Tsar Paul blame for this? The Austrians, for setting his forces up to fail. And so he did what the Austrians were so petrified he was going to do before the Second Coalition was formed in the first place. In October 1799, Tsar Paul tore up the alliance with the Austrians and withdrew Russia from the war. So we'll go ahead and put them back over there. Now, Paul was also pretty ticked at the British.
Bogus.
Yeah, I bet that's what everyone else in the coalition was saying. But Tsar Paul was also pretty ticked at the British, because the Russians had also endured the bulk of those casualties that had been taken during the invasion of the Netherlands. And no offense, but that's typical British military fashion. Let the other guys, the bigger land force, be the cannon fodder. It's not the case in World War I, but it really is the case in their history to this point, that they were really, really willing, when they were in charge, to put anybody else but the British soldiers up front. The final Russian break with the British won't come until, mid-1800. Though, by which point, Tsar Paul will be chatting it up with French First Consul Napoleon Bonaparte about, hey, you want a mutually beneficial alliance? As that stately quadrille of never-ending European dance partners continues to dance on. Because remember what Tsar Paul's problem was. Revolutionary Republic. That is not what the consulate's going to be. So he didn't have a big deal with it, because he'll see in First Consul Bonaparte an autocrat. Someone he can work with. Someone who should be in charge for a while. Ironically, these victories of the French in the fall of 1799 and the sudden withdrawal of the Russians from the Second Coalition didn't strengthen or stabilize the Directory. Now, you think it would, because their whole centerpiece column, the one thing that supported them through the whole period they've been in power, has been military support. Well, winning didn't exactly get the support back for the Directory. And that'll bring us, it's more timing than anything else, Rocket. And that'll bring us to the final act of our drama and our season. The coup of 18 Brumaire. We're going to take a little bit of time to set this coup up and explain what's going on, because Napoleon Bonaparte's going to almost blow it twice. Once in a little way, once in a big way. We're going to start the ball rolling down toward the fall of the Directory when we come back from our break. We've been streaming for an hour. We've been talking for 48 minutes. All that's left now for season 1 is to let the last few dominoes fall. So, we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you for being here tonight on this ultimate episode of the season to see how the story ends. We'll be back in a few minutes. Make sure you stand up, walk around, get a drink, and all the stuff I always say. And I'll talk to you in a few minutes. That's when Season 2 starts, Rocket. That is 6 weeks from today. And I believe that will give me enough time to take a little bit of a breather, just mentally, and then to also begin to fashion that overall skeleton outline I need to then begin writing. Berlin rocks. Before I keep going here, I need to thank the people who did the normal stream stuff, because I spent the first part of the stream thanking everyone else for everything else. Case, thanks for the resub. 18 months. Manny, again, thanks for those the 10 gift subs. I know we had Master Poe resub in there for 11 months. There's a host in there from Rocket. Support, as always, just awesome. So we're kind of done talking about external stuff. The whole first half here was about letting you know where France is militarily on the war fronts and domestically before we take this thing into the consulate and explain how Napoleon comes to power. The thing that's funny about the coup of 18 Brumaire is that Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't its principal mastermind. It's a timing thing, and the timing of his return to France, to answer Rocket's previous question, has more to do with the Directory being unable to capitalize on French military success than anything else. But he wasn't the guy planning things. The plan was underway before he actually hit French soil again after leaving Egypt. Now, one guy for sure was pointing at him the whole time. And that's Talleyrand. Talleyrand had Napoleon picked as his guy to be in charge after the Directory fell from the moment he became foreign minister. The honor, though, of principal mastermind goes to recently elected director CS, who was ably aided behind the scenes by recently ousted French foreign minister Charles de Talleyrand. So Talleyrand is in the background going, I know my guy, just gonna wait for the moment. Probably a little hope there going on as soon as, he gets back one of these days. But we're going to focus on CS first. Sometimes you are potato eyes, Rocket. Not often, but sometimes. CS, as we have repeatedly established, has not ever been a fan of the Directory. And his primary goal, again, as we've been foreshadowing, in joining it at this moment, seems to be he wanted to tear it down from the inside. This is something that he had been planning since the beginning. And then he decided to shove it into high gear once the Neo-Jacobin uprising of power began to happen. Because CS believed it would be disastrous for France to fall back into the chaos and potential bloodshed of a revolutionary democracy. And that one you could put in the no-duh column. So in his own words, CS would need a head and a sword. The head was obviously his own in his own mind, so all he really needed was a sword. And this brings us back to the first what if moment that got mentioned tonight, because CS had initially settled for his sword on young General Joubert. And he had actually been the one who had engineered Joubert's promotion to be in charge of the army of Italy in order to enhance Joubert's reputation. So it's the first what if. What if Joubert didn't die? What if Joubert lived? Talleyrand going to win that fight or go along with it? Certainly cast doubt on the idea that Napoleon's eventually the sword here. But then Joubert was killed at the Battle of Novi, as we discussed last episode. And CS had to go back to searching for a sword. I suspect revolutionary France would have continued. I don't know, because there's a piece of what happens on the day that tosses a lot of the what ifs into question too. We're gonna get to that because it's like holy crap moment. As Sayes looked around, none of the other real candidates that were really there were palatable or reliable. Jobertic wars don't roll off the tongue. That's fair. But as Sayes looks around at it, okay, well, my guy, my man, he's dead. Where do I go here? I need a sword. I need somebody in a sword who can command the army to do what I need them to do on the day that this goes down. Who will then, in Sayes's mind, then kindly step aside, please. Now, obviously, Jean-Baptiste Jourdan wasn't going to be his guy. If he wasn't a neo-Jacobin, if he hadn't been pissed off by the Directory so many times, it's really possible that Jean-Baptiste Jourdan could have been the guy, had fortune favored him differently, or simply not put him in command of so many bad situations. But at the same moment that Sayes is going, yeah, not Jourdan, he also looked at the new French foreign minister, Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, excuse me, and realized that he was also allied with the Neo-Jacobins. And at the same moment that Sayes is like casting about, looking for his sword, Bernadotte was actually talking to the Neo-Jacobins because they were plotting a coup too. Now, the Neo-Jacobin coup doesn't go anywhere, but they were talking to Jourdan, and they certainly were pointing at Bernadotte as their man. Which is funny, because Bernadotte's going to be one of Napoleon's marshals. And then they're going to hate each other. Sayes finally comes around to, I guess I'll gas this guy, and he asks General Jean-Victor Marie Moreau, the other guy along the Rhine, and the guy who was part of the retreat from Italy. Because Moreau hated the Directory with a passion. But his response to Sayes is, I'm a soldier, not a politician. And I don't want to really be a part of any political revolution. But consequently, sorry, I got to mute real quick. But tremendously and consequently, Moreau does not turn him in. He doesn't go out and say, Sayes is trying to start a coup. He doesn't. He just says, I'm not your guy. I'm not your man. And as the story goes around Sayes and Moreau's conversation, Sayes was meeting with Moreau about this in mid-October 1799, just trying to convince Moreau that really all I need you to do here is lead an army. And you're good at leading an army. Trying to convince him to be the sword. When word came through that General Napoleon Bonaparte had set foot back in France. This is the timing part. Both men, Moreau and Sayes, were pretty shocked that, Napoleon was alive, because neither of them knew that Napoleon had secretly ditched Egypt at the end of August. But when the news came in that Napoleon was alive, just as these two guys were in the same room and Sayes was trying to convince Moreau to be the sword, as Moreau heard the news, he looked at Sayes, and again, according to several different sources, he said to Sayes, there is your man. Bonaparte finally landed in France on October 10th after a 40-plus day voyage of successfully dodging British naval patrols. Napoleon did not like sailing. I've read his own letters. He didn't like being on boats. 40 days is a long time. After he landed, word spread like wildfire that the conquering hero, remember, he was that in their mind. It's dirty, too. And Napoleon, despite not liking the aristocracy, certainly was a little bit of a dandy at times. He liked his comfort when he wasn't fighting. Let's put it that way. But after landing, this word of the great conquering hero, and again to make the point, he was that to the French. He was the guy who ended the war. He had come home. And as Napoleon basically made a beeline for Paris, everywhere along the way, he was just greeted with jubilant celebrations in every town and every home he passed by. Local dignitaries along the way would come out and meet him and glad hand him and cheer and wave their hats at him. He was a rock star because of what he had done in the First Coalition and in Italy. This entire enthusiastic reception was based primarily on Bonaparte's reputation as a peace bringer. Sounds like Julius Caesar has said that had more to do with he was about populist reform. Julius Caesar, whether he believed it or he just was playing the crowd, was playing as a populist, even though he was a member of the aristocracy. That's different than, I mean, the Gaul campaign and the letters he sent home certainly were propaganda, but that's different than Napoleon Bonaparte ended the war which required my son to be conscripted. And everyone knew it. Everyone knew Bonaparte had just ended that first war. Everyone knew that when he left France, that war he ended just started again. And so everything in their minds was connected to this idea of Napoleon makes peace. Of course, everyone didn't know about the failure of the Egyptian expedition yet. I'm reluctant. Historians will call them Napoleon's failures. I don't like saying the Egyptian expedition failed due to Napoleon's failures, because he didn't lose an open battle while he was there. He just lost one siege. He wasn't beaten in the field. The key moment of failure in the Egyptian campaign was not his. It was, the admiral who failed to follow orders as things, just steamrolled after that once things were lost at Abukir Bay. Yeah, he didn't lose the entire navy. Thank you, Berlin. The people also did not know that, his invasion of Egypt had kind of been the reason the Ottomans had decided to declare war on France. I don't know how they didn't make that connection, but they really didn't. And they also didn't know that, he had brought Russia into the war pretty much by pissing off Tsar Paul I by, taking Malta. They didn't know any of that stuff. All they knew, the common everyday people and most of the soldiers, that Napoleon brought peace and that he then left and we're back at war again. The people wanted peace, and they believed Bonaparte could deliver it. So when he landed, it was like rapture. Here it is. The guy who will end this again is here. And sadly, if that really was the dream, then the next decade will let all of them know that Napoleon Bonaparte was not your man. Because there will be 1 year of peace during the Napoleonic era. One. From the time he takes First Consul to the time he is exiled to Elba, there will be 1 year of peace. So when young Bonaparte arrived in Paris, now all of 30 years old, he was scrupulously reserved about what his intentions were. And everybody in the capital, pretty much, projected their hope onto him. Men who supported the Directory obviously wanted him to support the Directory. The Neo-Jacobins wanted him to and contacted him about leading a coup from the left. They were willing to replace Bernadotte with Bonaparte in their plan. Sayes and his faction, obviously this is the sword. The two guys don't like each other, but he's the most capable military commander out there and he's ambitious. So obviously Sayes switched, took Moreau's advice, and wanted to have Napoleon come in and be the military lead of an authoritarian coup from the middle. The only men who really didn't see Napoleon Bonaparte as a potential champion and savior here were the conservative royalists, because they knew he was not one of them. Wolfpack, thank you for the follow. It's actually pretty funny here, because after Napoleon comes to power, he'll spend about a year not really talking to, King Louis XVIII until he tells him, buzz off. It does speak here, though, to just how much of a major celebrity, I mean major celebrity, Bonaparte had become via his Italian campaigns and his successful ending of the War of the First Coalition. that nearly everyone looked at him, dumped their prior choice of leader, and began to court him to lead their effort. But, of course, it was Talleyrand who took the lead in drawing Bonaparte towards the Sieyès conspiracy. Yeah, it also speaks, a good point, Gilly. It also speaks to how doomed the Directory was. Sure, the Directory wanted Bonaparte, but they didn't have a whole lot of support coming from anywhere. And remember that the person who believed primarily in the power of the Directory at this point was still Paul Barras. For now, not for much longer. But Talleyrand's the guy who gets Bonaparte to come over to the Sieyès-led conspiracy. Because, remember, Napoleon and Talleyrand have been exchanging letters for quite a while now. Sieyès might have been looking all over and everywhere for his sword, but again, Talleyrand had picked his man right from the moment he returned from his exile in America. All that was really left was for Talleyrand to convince Sieyès that Bonaparte was in fact the guy. And again,
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Bonaparte and Sieyès did not like each other. And that was gonna be a problem, and was the first "this almost didn't happen" moment of the coup of 18 Brumaire. Because Sieyès saw Napoleon as a rustic, because he's Corsican, it's a little racist. They had been conspiring since Napoleon's last visit to Paris, correct? They had been talking about what they are going to do, yes. Did it involve Sieyès? Talleyrand's the man, right? He's the man in the middle, talking to one side and the other side, because these two guys, Sieyès and Napoleon, don't like each other. They weren't talking to each other. So Talleyrand's the fulcrum. He's the linchpin in this. Sieyès is the organizer, but Talleyrand's the guy who does the talking, because that's what he's really good at. And again, Sieyès and Napoleon hated each other. That was the big problem. It was going to be a problem. Because Sieyès, again, saw Napoleon as a rustic, uneducated, provincial. I don't know where he gets uneducated from. The guy attended the most prestigious military academy in France. Rustic, that's Sieyès casting a racist Corsican glance at Napoleon. And he thought Napoleon had an overinflated ego. True. But that's quaint coming from the guy who refused to serve his country because they didn't like his ideas. Napoleon, on the other hand, saw Sieyès as a pompous aristocrat of dubious loyalties because of his past, also with an overinflated ego. And I tend to take Bonaparte's side here a little bit because Bonaparte's seriously proven himself at this point on the battlefield. He's won and won and won, and he lost one siege and maybe lost one small battle, but he's a winner, and he's proven it. Sieyès had tried to write a couple of constitutions, and he rode pretty high after his pamphlet, What is the Third Estate? And he came in now opportunistically to be a director, but you have to look back at the last 10 years and go, what did Sieyès do? What's Napoleon done? Napoleon's body of work is just simply more stupendous than Sieyès's. And I think Sieyès's ego was probably bigger than his britches at this point. But it's a problem. The partnership between Sieyès, the head, and Napoleon, the sword, almost failed immediately due to a standoff over their mutually inflated egos. When Bonaparte arrived in Paris, both men wanted the other guy to pay the first call. You know, get in your carriage and come to my office or my house or wherever I'm staying. They wanted the other guy to do it, because that's like paying homage to the other person. I respect you enough. I recognize you're my superior. Neither of them wanted to go to the other guy's place. Sieyès couldn't believe Bonaparte would not come around to pay his respects. After all, Sieyès was now a director of the government. You know, he was inviting Bonaparte to then come and conspire against, but technically he was above him in the overall chain of command, and that part I get. But Bonaparte at this point didn't believe he should be paying calls to anyone, and his own letters reveal he's pretty upset. Letters to Talleyrand. They're more like notes. They show that he was pretty upset that Sieyès did not recognize that, you know, the conquering hero and savior of France had come home and would not pay call to him. It became a thing. But Talleyrand finally went to Napoleon and said, look, stop being a dumbass. Sayas is technically your superior. He's the one inviting you in. Things might change down the road here, so just do it. And so Bonaparte reluctantly stowed his ego and agreed to do what Talleyrand was asking. And that right there should tell you how much, at this moment in history, Napoleon Bonaparte trusted Talleyrand. At the same time, and I've read these journals, Bonaparte would confide to his journals that this is the very last time he would let Sayas beat him. For the next 2 weeks, secret meetings were regularly held between the plotters to plan the fall of the Directory. Talleyrand is kind of the guy to trust, weirdly enough. Yeah, I know, right? That's why he's a freaking amazing person to study historically. He's just one of those guys that he'll sit on the seat of power in France for one day in his entire life. We're going to get to that day next season in the first episode. But otherwise, he was just a master behind-the-curtain chess player. And I think you have to realize that Talleyrand knew who to screw over and knew who not to. And I think he knew at this point, especially because he was putting so much backing into Napoleon being his guy, he wasn't going to screw Napoleon over. And a grifter, yes. He was a grifter. Still fascinating. But again, 2 weeks after this meeting between Sayas and Bonaparte, where they kind of, yep, let's do this thing, secret meetings start to happen, where the plot to cause the fall of the Directory begins to be unhatched. And besides Bonaparte and Sayas and Talleyrand, the other principal conspirators turned out to be Napoleon's brother Lucien, who was hopefully about to be elected president of the Council of 500 at a very opportune time, and also police minister Joseph Fouché, who wasn't supposed to be on, in on the plot, but, when his spies found out what these guys were up to, he said, I'll help out, and kind of invited himself into the plot, which, yeah, I think they had to say, okay, because the alternative was he was going to run to the people that would oppose it and let them know that this was going down and it would all been over. Fouché, again, ultimate survivalist, looked at the landscape. He's got spies everywhere in the city and said, this is the winning team. Also included in the conspirators, and the conspirators to a sense, well, not one of them, 2 of the 4 directors. One of them was definitely in on it. Pierre-Roger Ducos was on the inside. And Paul Barras was also in on it. Kinda. Barras was invited to join only because they needed to keep him from spilling the beans if he got wind of it and wasn't in on this power play, because Barras only likes one thing more than power, and that's money to gamble. So if there was a move being made, they needed to make sure he was, at least thought, he was in on it, so that he wouldn't go try to do something about it. So they kinda let him in. And they're gonna screw him. Because the secret plan, or part of the secret plan all along, was to purge Barras along with everyone else not named Ducos and, Sayas from the Directory, but we'll get to the fact that the Directory is not going to be there in a second. They wanted to purge Barras along with everyone else when the time came because no one trusted Barras. I wonder why, because his loyalties have been, super slippery fluid the entire time he's been in control. All of his shifting alliances of the prior 3+ years are going to bite Barras in the butt here. For now, though, the conspirators are like, yeah, you're part of the club. We'll teach you the secret handshake. Come on in. We'll talk about everything except how we're going to hose you. And they let him in, kinda, on the plot. The coup was arranged to unfold in 3 stages. First, all 5 directors would resign simultaneously. Second, the legislative councils would be induced to appoint a new provisional executive to replace the Directory. That provisional executive is going to be called the consulate eventually, but it's going to be a very small group of people. That includes Napoleon and SAS. Third, that provisional executive, that group of small people who happen to be drawn completely from this group of conspirators, will draft a new constitution. Let me in the clubhouse or I'm telling Mom. Fouché. Pretty accurate.
Boy.
Despite their careful planning, this coup was a very near-run thing. It could have easily gone a different way here. But let's take a moment and consider the what-ifs. What if Joubert hadn't died? What if Moreau hadn't lost? What if Jourdan hadn't lost? What if Moreau had said yes? There would be no Napoleon Bonaparte on the inside of this circle. What happens then? What if Moreau leads a French force that is more loyal to Napoleon or sees him as the better leader? Or what if they don't? What if Moreau's the sword? It's very interesting to think about, because this is a critical moment where this choice and now this plan, which didn't originate from Napoleon, is then going to be used by Napoleon with great skill to put himself as the de facto dictator of France very quickly. And of all the people he wanted to screw over, it was SAS. But despite this careful planning, this thing could have gone a different way. This was partly due to the fact that this plan was planned to unfold too slowly. Yeah, what if Napoleon hadn't listened to Talleyrand to swallow his ego? It's another great point. But this plan, this coup, these guys are planning on rolling it out over a period of 2 days. What's the cardinal rule of coups? Do it fast, before anybody can react. They were going to do it over 2 days. It somehow still worked. Partly, again, because they were paying too much attention to constitutional protocol, following the rules up to a point. It'll almost fail because Bonaparte himself is pretty impetuous and impatient to get power once he realizes what he wants to do. And now that I've read it, the classic biography of Talleyrand recommended to me by Dustin, by Duff Cooper, he says in the biography of Talleyrand, if you are going to stage a coup, it has to be fast, willing to break the law, and you need a level head. And that does not describe the coup of 18 Brumaire. But because there wasn't a real emergency out there, because all of a sudden French fortunes in the war front looked pretty good, the conspirators couldn't point to something and say, hey, we need to rewrite the Constitution here because of emergency. They had to invent a crisis. For this, they could have pointed to one of two things as their crisis. Either trump up a royalist insurrection or trump up a neo-Jacobin insurrection. Guess which one they picked. After multiple discussions, the conspirators settled on an invented insurrection from the left, from the Jacobins, because, it was, after all, more plausible, as the neo-Jacobins were plotting and they had actually approached Bonaparte. The left was also stronger. No, this one's not so much an imaginary problem. It's the threat's there. The plot is not. But the left was stronger, and it would likely fight harder. So it was a good idea to make them the focus of, the emergency, to take out their knees before they knew what had hit them. Because the coup guys, they weren't really that concerned about the royalists doing anything at this point. So after securing the assistance of some friendly printers to pump out propaganda, financing from some friendly bankers, and assurances from a cadre of military officers that they would follow Bonaparte when the time came, and this one's really important, they will follow Bonaparte when the time came. There was nothing left to do but to do it. And they will. When we get back from a break. Because we'll bring the coup of 18 Brumaire to fruition. Take it all the way to the end. To where Napoleon is put into a position where he's writing this constitution with Sayes, but, really Napoleon's in charge. And then we're going to take a step back at the end of the episode and kind of talk through just the major points that have gotten us from there to here tonight. I do have a music video for all of you as well, with a heavy metal song to cap off the end of things, and then we'll mix it in there. The quiz will probably fall before that video. And then we'll wrap things up on the season. So thank you all for being here this evening. We will finish Season 1 after a break. So get a drink, stand up for sure, walk around, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom, and then come back for the thrilling conclusion of 45 episodes of work as we put Napoleon Bonaparte in power. Good thing you're ready to rock, Berlin, because we're ready to rock. Let's rock. Let's do this. End this season. Welcome back.
My lord, yourself.
Thank you, Berlin. By the way, for those veterans out there that may have noticed my shirt on the front, it says veteran. On the back, it says, noun.
Yes, I'm excited about the gift.
It says noun, a person who wrote a blank check payable to his country up to the to be cashed in up to the sum of one's life. It's a great shirt. It's by Grunt Style. For anybody that's looking at it, I love this shirt. I bought it a couple weeks ago, and I just love it. But here we are. As it said in Top Gun, it's the bottom of the ninth. The score is tied, and it's time for the big one. Of all the coups and insurrections and uprisings that we have gone through, this will be the last one. Napoleon will not face significant coup-like pressure during his reign, especially after he's emperor. But we're going to roll the ball down the lane for the last time and put Napoleon in power. So on the morning of November 9th, 1799, which is 18 Brumaire, year 3, on the Republican calendar, which I hopefully will mention for the last time in this show, Paris woke to find posters plastered all over the city, thanks to those friendly printers, warning of a Jacobin plot to overthrow the government. So they took care of the PR side pretty well. Sieyès, in his role as director, then dispatched a summons to the delegates of the Council of 500 to meet for an early emergency session to address this problem. This is a summons he accidentally forgot to give to about 60 delegates, which he deemed to be most likely to be hostile to what was about to go down. When this emergency session then met, Council President Napoleon Bonaparte stood up and said, quote, "Gentlemen, we are all in imminent danger. A mob uprising not seen since the old days of revolutionary chaos is in the making," end quote. Lucien then recommended the council immediately quit Paris and relocate to the nearby town of Saint-Cloud. The very nervous and extremely bewildered delegates all agreed to the idea. So the move here is get the council together and get them out of Paris where we can control them. When the Council of Ancients kind of met at their normal time a few hours later, they were surprised to find that the Council of 500 had already approved this move and that they were having to follow suit out of town because the plot basically said, let's get the Council of 500 out of town, the Ancients will follow them because their, bicameral legislature should be in the same place. To protect these fleeing delegates and to defend the government of the Directory, the Council of 500, on their way to Saint-Cloud, transferred command of all Paris area soldiers to General Napoleon Bonaparte. After all, this was not a hard move for them to make. Bonaparte had once defended the directorial government against a royalist uprising with his whiff of grape shot across the bridges on 13 Vendémiaire. Who better to protect us and the government? And so the sword was given his sword. And so far things... Oh, Eddie! So far things are going pretty good for the conspirators. As the councils evacuated Paris, well, time for the 5 directors to resign. But only 2 of them were in on it. Sieyès and Ducos. Barras thought he was in on it, but he wasn't in on this part. On 18 Brumaire, Sieyès and Ducos dropped out of sight, and Barras couldn't find him. Then the other 2 directors, General Moulin and Louis-Jérôme Gaulier, started sending Barras frantic messages, asking what the heck's going on, and they were still looking to Barras as like their overall lead, asking him to do something. Barras at this moment must have been like, well, I thought I was doing something, but it looks like something's being done to me. Then Talleyrand came over to Barras' house with a pre-written letter of resignation. Let Barras know he'd been duped and that it was his time to go. Realizing he had been dealt a fake hand, Barras decided he had no plan, didn't know who he could actually trust, and if he wanted to save his own skin, it probably wasn't worth fighting what was about to go down. It's also like 99% certain that Talleyrand came to his door with a letter and a massive bribe to make all this go down easier, and Barras liked nothing more than big fat bags of cash he could then go compulsively gamble away. And I say 99% certain because down the road Barras will deny the fact that he was bribed, but like numerous other sources say it was part of the plan. Barras was in his carriage and on his way out of Paris by the end of the day on 19 Brumaire. And in the meantime, Sieyès and Ducos had already signed their own resignations, leaving Moulin and Gaulier as an impotent rump of two directors. Oh yeah, you know Talleyrand took a little bit out of that bag. You know he took a handful out of there. This is the point at which things to start getting dicey for the coup. And dicey in part because this was all planned to unfold over 2 days instead of having everything wrapped up before people went to sleep on day one. The councils convened the next day in Saint-Cloud, and they started to discover there was shockingly little evidence to support Lucien Bonaparte's claim about some imminent danger from a neo-Jacobin coup. It was starting to become clear to both councils that they had been duped, but they didn't know why. They didn't know to what end or what purpose yet. That's when Napoleon commits his big blunder. Under the impression that the councils would just agree and create a new provisional executive and go away, like the plan said, he was getting annoyed that this was all taking too long. So, in Saint-Cloud,
Remember to clonk that follow button.
he pushed his way into the Council of Ancients, flanked by soldiers. And delegates there then said, "Oh, we get it now. Bonaparte's the one trying to overthrow us." The general tried to address them and demand that they order constitutional revisions, but he was heckled pretty mercilessly. Like, they wouldn't listen to him, and it caused him to storm out. I'm just wondering why the Jacobins in the council didn't stand up and be like, "What the heck are you talking about? There's nothing in the plans for this," because then they would admit that there, potentially was some other plan maybe. Also, they weren't invited for the most part. All that's needed here is a quorum. You don't need all the delegates. You just need enough of them. So after Bonaparte got heckled by the Council of Ancients and stormed out in a huff, he marched over to where the Council of 500 was, and there he received an even more hostile reception. They too shouted him down, called him a tyrant. Calls went out from within the body to outlaw him and declare him an enemy of the state. There's a famous painting that's going to be in the end video, and if you look at Napoleon Bonaparte right now, I have him in a different picture tonight. He is in the red uniform of First Consul. The painting depicts him in this uniform, which he couldn't possibly be wearing yet, but it shows this moment. You'll see it near the end of the video, where you'll see Napoleon surrounded by men grabbing at him. It is depicting this moment where they actually manhandled him and pushed him out of the hall, and critically this happened. And this is a great what-if question. The manhandling, and it was violent manhandling, they cut his cheek. And so here's Napoleon Bonaparte being pushed out of a hall of men violently yelling at him and manhandling him, bloodied. Bonaparte had stormed into these councils to cow them into submission because he was such a big deal, and instead he had left them agitated, and emboldened, and not wanting to go along with anything anybody was saying when someone walked in the door to tell them to do something. So that's really bad for the plan, considering the plan hinges on get them to instate a provisional executive now that the directory's gone that could rewrite write a new constitution. So the success of this coup was very much in doubt because Napoleon jumped the gun here. And ironically in history, the Bonaparte who saves the day is named Lucien. Lucien, president of the Council of 500, present when his brother is being manhandled and pushed out the door, follows his brother out the door. And then once he's outside, he just spins a wild lie to the assembled soldiers that Napoleon was leading, that a company of ultra-radical delegates inside the Council of 500, they were inside, they had produced daggers. They had just tried to assassinate Napoleon, as evidenced by the blood on his cheek. And they were threatening both councils with further violence. So there was a group inside the chamber who was trying to potentially assassinate everybody. What if Napoleon's cheek hadn't been cut? Well, these soldiers have done what they're about to do. Led by Joachim Murat, the man who led that cavalry charge to retake Alexandria just prior to Bonaparte's departure and was chosen to come back to France with Napoleon, should tell you how important he is. Murat assembled the soldiers and they charged in, cleared both halls, sending some of the delegates literally running into the woods to hide. When the dust settled, the conspirators then rounded up enough compliant delegates to get that quorum, which is necessary majority to do anything legislatively, and induced them to call a 6-week recess while changes to the Constitution were discussed. On the way out the door, with this quorum, the bicameral legislative body of the Directory appointed 3 provisional consuls. Consul, for those of you who don't know, was the title given to the head executive of the Roman Republic, of which there were 2 elected annually who led the government jointly. They appointed 3 provisional consuls to take the lead in the discussions about what needed to change in the Constitution. And wouldn't you know it, those 3 men were Sieyès, Bonaparte, and Roger Ducos. 3 of the core conspirators. I bet they felt they were in pretty good hands with, 2 of the directors who had just resigned and the best general in France. Maybe. The councils then also appointed 50 of their own delegates to kind of stay in session, and they wouldn't be able to actually do anything because they didn't have a quorum, but to stay in session and work with the 3 consuls on the revisions to the Constitution, while the rest of the delegates were sent home to wait for the results. And they would wait forever. The temporary recess turned out to be permanent. When the Council of 500 and the Council of Ancients went home on November 10th, 1799, they would never be recalled. The Directory was dead. So as you can see, the coup of 18 Brumaire doesn't quite get Napoleon all the way into total power. He walks out of it as one of the 3 provisional consuls, sure. And Sieyès obviously believes he's going to be the dominant personality in the new government. But remember what Napoleon wrote in his journal. Never again will Sieyès beat me. Now that the sword was done, Sieyès believed he would be able to run political circles around Bonaparte. The head is craftier than the sword, after all, right? Except this is Napoleon Bonaparte. So obviously Sieyès has wildly underestimated his man. Bonaparte was able to exploit the fact that the coup of Brumaire would not have been possible without armed intervention from the army. So the oops moment turned into a leverageable moment because his troops were the ones that got it done at the end. And because that army was loyal, again, remember they said to Bonaparte, that cadre of officers swore they would follow Bonaparte. Napoleon wound up playing a super active role in the writing of the Constitution of Year 8, which will set up what we call the French Consulate. Thanks, Lucien's funny, before we move into what they write, Lucien Bonaparte was a staunch Republican. He is actually going to rebel against his brother and go into self-imposed exile during the Empire. Because he doesn't believe in tyrants and despots. Helped one of the biggest ones in history get to his throne. Now, as they're writing this new Constitution of Year 8, Bonaparte and Sieyès did agree on a few things. Otherwise, they would have never gotten to the business of trying to use each other to try to seize power, right? They would have never had the conversation in the room to become co-conspirators in the first place if they didn't agree on a few things. One of those things was they agreed too much democracy and too many destabilizing elections was not a good thing. So the Constitution of Year 8 creates an unwieldy apparatus where communes voters would get together and vote 10% of their members to a departmental assembly, who would then vote 10% of their members to a national assembly. And then from that national assembly, a wholly new unelected institution called the Senate would pick 100 men from that group to serve in a tribunate, and then pick another 300 men to serve in a legislative assembly. So the National Assembly in this scenario is just a pool of people to pick from, that the Senate, who no one elects, will then plop into a body called the tribunate, which is kind of like the Senate, and 300 other men to serve in the legislative assembly, which is kind of like the lower chamber, except they're not going to have that much power. The tribunes, which is also a Roman office and a term for advocate of the people, would be allowed to debate a bill, and the legislative assembly would be allowed to vote on a bill, but neither would have the right to introduce a bill. That would be left to the small and unelected Council of State. The entire thing was designed to keep the people as far away from the process as possible while giving them the illusion that they had some kind of say in it. And while they agreed on that, Bonaparte and Sieyès differed very much on the all-important executive portion of the consulate. Both, of course, believed it must be the central power of the state. Sieyès, though, wanted to create two consuls, just like the Roman Republic, except one would handle domestic affairs and one would handle foreign affairs, so their jobs would be split. I don't see that working out too well. Kind of have to coordinate that and agree. Sieyès obviously planned to be one of the first two consuls, and he certainly didn't want Napoleon to be the other one, and Napoleon knew it. Sieyès instead dreamed up this office he called the Grand Elector, which would be appointed for life. Hey, here's a life appointment for you, Napoleon. And serve as a constitutional figurehead. That should placate his ego. And beyond the power to appoint the consuls from another unelected body of individuals, pretty much who he wanted, the Grand Elector would have no other power. And that's where Sieyès wanted Bonaparte to go. Here, you can pick the consuls, which of course will tell you who we want you to pick. And that's it. That's all you get. But it's for life. Grand Elector for life sounds great. And Bonaparte said the for life part sounds great. Bonaparte famously said that he would not play the part of fatted pig and pushed to keep a system of 3 consuls in place based on the provisional consuls that had been adopted by the assemblies before they gave up their power. And then once Bonaparte had this concession in hand, he ensured it would be an unequal triad, with the First Consul enjoying all manner of special privileges and prerogatives, and wouldn't you know it, across the course of everything that goes down, Napoleon Bonaparte gets himself appointed First Consul, beats Sieyès. Sieyès totally outmaneuvered here, wasn't even able to become one of the consuls at all. he was shuffled off to that non-elected body called the Senate, where he would play an important role, but one clearly subordinate to First Consul Bonaparte, who would never again pay a call to say yes. And Bonaparte turned out to be both the head and the sword of the coup. When the Constitution of Year 8 was promulgated, it came with a preface that ended by saying that it was based on the sacred rights of property, equality, and liberty that the revolution had been dedicated to since the beginning. That the new Constitution would be strong, stable, and would protect the rights of citizens and the health of the state. Citizens, it said, quote, "The revolution is established on the principles with which it began. It is over," end quote. So it's a nail. It's a pretty big public nail to say all this stuff that has been going down since the States General were called is done. And indeed it was. The Constitution of Year 8 is the first constitution since our discussion of the revolution that is not prefaced by a clear declaration of rights. There is no declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen here, which had been attempted to be copied every time in some form to this point. That's gone. The revolution was indeed over, as this Constitution said. But though we know what comes next, no one at the time could have possibly known that it was truly the end of the revolution, and that inside of 5 years, First Consul Napoleon Bonaparte will transform into self-crowned Emperor Napoleon I. Drawing a line.
Well, it's about tree fitting.
Enjoy those. Drawing a line between the revolution and the Napoleonic era is a tricky, inexact, and ultimately futile business. No one's going to agree on it. I actually don't think it ends here. I think it ends in Thermidor. The run from the fall of the Bastille to Waterloo is still all one connected series of events and one continuous story. And that is why the story will continue after this logical break, where the government of France is now clearly telling its citizens that the era of revolution is over. Napoleon Bonaparte, as First Consul, is now the de facto ruler and basically dictator of France. So next season, when we return, some point in mid-August, I'm targeting the 13th, we will delve into the consulate more fully so you can understand it and into its first years and how it actually worked in more detail, along with the steps it took on the road to empire. The Napoleonic era is just as interesting as the Revolutionary era. However, it's more simple. There is far less internal infighting and near zero internal instability, which will allow us to focus, obviously, on the conquest of Europe by Emperor Bonaparte. Season 2 will take us down that road to Waterloo and just a little bit past that. We will also delve in Season 2 into the many systemic changes made by the man, Napoleon Bonaparte, which the world still operates from, like the Napoleonic Code and the Corps system, which the world's armies will emulate. The American and rebel armies in the Civil War will. We still have corps today in our military in the United States because of Napoleon. So as the season begins again in August, I hope to see you all back curious, hungry for more of this story, and refreshed near the end of summer when we return to France to find out just what happens next. But we're going to take a look back for a second, just to re-ping some of these times and places into your head that we've talked about for a year. Remember, we started off with a conversation about 3 estates and a broken regime that was where no one man was governed by the same set of laws, and then it couldn't pay its bills because of a succession of controllers general who had different ideas about the Enlightenment and what should be done with respect to free trade, and these barriers just wouldn't fall. And then everybody who had a stake in it just couldn't give up their little piece. They're willing to sacrifice everybody else's, but they wouldn't. And then Jacques Necker comes along and pretty much fabricates the books convincing France that no, everything's okay financially. But Richie Cranium raided with 8 people, thank you very much. But then Controller General Calonne will come in and try to actually do some reform and take it to the Assembly of Notables, who will not go along with his plan. And even once they get out of that, they will get to a point where the Paris Parlement will reject it as defenders of the rights of the people. And then Louis XVI will bumble between the Séance Royale, where he fell asleep, and rebellions that occur among the populace because they're starving, like the Day of the Tiles, and then enlightened nobles like Sayes come along and start teaching the Third Estate. This is how you make actual change. And the Estates General get called. And then the Third Estate says, no, we're the National Assembly. And they take an oath on a tennis court that says, we will not disband until there's a new constitution for France. Which leads to all sorts of panic in Paris that summer, including the fear that the army is being called in to trounce the people, which causes the Bastille to fall. And then the Great Fear follows, where people just didn't know what was going on at all and thought the next town over's people were, the mobs, that there were mobs out there trying to just ransack things, but at the same time they're destroying all the feudal records. And then comes along the Great Rights of Man and the tear down of everything that had to do with feudalism and aristocratic rights. But then critically, the women march on Versailles, and this is the big moment that people miss. They caused the royal family to move to Paris. That's a big deal, but more importantly, the delegates who had not been so polarized moved in with each other instead of the people from their hometowns. And that's when the factions begin to form as we march down through the rise of the Jacobins in Paris, but also the Society of 1789 just kind of holding power for a while. But then remember, Robespierre convinces everybody in the National Assembly they're not allowed to run for office in the Legislative Assembly, which leads to a problem once they're brought in. But also, this new constitution that they've written, the king decides to make a run for it, which undermines the whole thing. But as the Legislative Assembly gets ready to take control, there's a massacre that follows that flight that sees prisoners just knifed without trial in order to, get them ready to go out and fight. The Legislative Assembly comes in with no reason to support the Constitution that the National Assembly had put forth. And it ends with a war being declared that we're still fighting, thanks to Jacques-Pierre Brissot and the Girondins. It ends with an insurrection on August the 10th, 1792, where the king is deposed and later executed. And then it turns to internal civil war, where the Vendée flares up and becomes an ulcer for France for years. The war goes on as radicals take control and just take France to crazy land, changing the calendar and trying to get rid of religion, and basically standing up a small council that takes absolute control and starts murdering its way to try to get their power solidified. But those guys eventually have a coup against them, where moderates come in and say, we got to take care of these guys before we're dead. And those guys stand up the Directory eventually, which takes us down the road we've been on for the last month and a half, seeing Napoleon's star rise as he finally takes control of the war in Italy and then goes and kind of fails in Egypt, which takes us to today, where that governmental system is over. It's a long-running line of points I've forgotten to mention, because none of this was written. This is all off the cuff in my head. We've spent a year talking about this. 56 weeks, 45 episodes talking about this. Hopefully, this season has demonstrated to you some things that are really important to our contemporary times. How many times, especially the directors, let's send a slate of fake electors. Hopefully those of you paying attention to current events realize how poignant that one is, in order to simply undermine confidence in the election. They did it twice. Worked once. What if it had worked here? The idea of radical populism and reform too fast being a bad thing because it led to chaos. The need to change too quickly and everybody demanding everything immediately led to bloodshed. The enragés, remember those guys? They were out there way crazier than just the sans-culottes and the Jacobins. The Jacobins were so afraid of the enragés, they locked them up in a centrist coup. Well, insurrection in those days. But take your time and reflect back on what we've discussed here. The big thing for the future of the series is obviously Napoleon's in power and Lazare Carnot's levée en masse, which industrializes a state for the purposes of the military. But there are political lessons to be learned here too. Don't forget those things because history matters. It matters to the point that you should not try to whitewash what happened. Tens of thousands of people died in the Great Terror, which was a political murder fest by those who wished to hold on to power. You cannot simply go back and say, we don't like that part of our history. France has never tried to whitewash it. We should not try to whitewash our history either, but instead learn the lessons from it so that we don't pay the price for repeating them again. So, we have a quiz first and a video second as we bring this whole thing to the close. Thank you all for 13 months of your time and attention. Hopefully you've enjoyed this journey. The story is just basically at the midpoint of an epic tale. We'll be back in August to talk more about Napoleon for sure, and then go a little bit further with France before we widen things out to Europe, because it has to be widened out so that we can start our march to the First World War. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the comments I've received, the appreciation for the work done, and the support from everybody financially, with your time, with your talent. Seriously, thank you all so much for making the work a little easier and something I want to do. You'll recall in the past I've done things where they've petered out because my motivation wasn't there. I'm still very fired up to do this because you guys fire me to do this. So keep your enthusiasm high and I will keep on trucking. If I publish a book, you will buy an autographed copy. You won't have to buy it if I ever write a book. People that were here at the beginning will never have to pay for that. You were here in the first place. Don't forget, there are links in Discord that will be all of my notes. Those notes are free for you to read. You cannot edit them. I would humbly request you read them on Google Docs. You don't take them anywhere else. It is a tremendous body of work. I'm putting them out there so you guys can come back and read and refresh. I would appreciate if they are not copied. That is for the community, the people I trust. But enough said, we'll go do a quiz tonight, our last quiz of the season, and see who comes out on top here between probably Gilly and Rocket. Once I find where the heck I put my quiz.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Yeah, don't forget to clonk that follow button. 10 questions, one of which is not in tonight's show. It'll pay off if you've been here. Once I fix a typo, again, the way this thing works, exclamation point, answer, space your answer. Don't put my name fixed with 2 X's in your answer, Berlin, and don't say the word boy in your answer. There's no wrong answer, but this helps me get a gauge for how well I conveyed the information to this evening and across the course of 13 months. Points are up on the board. Gilly is way out in front. If he wins tonight, he'll get a piece of swag from the store, or he could choose to donate that money to charity. Yeah, boy or fixed equals no. But here comes your first question of the night, and away we go with the last quiz of Season 1. Name a point in history where the French Revolution can logically have been said to be over besides the coup of 18 Brumaire. Gilly is in. Rocket locked out. Gilly will still read his answer, but Gilly's answer will not count. need to change that text. It locks you out from the question. That card was put up before I changed the quiz format. I never changed it after all these episodes. Berlin is in. I don't think it's right either, Berlin. And I'll explain why. Five seconds left. All right, so there's a couple places. Right now, Napoleon Bonaparte is First Consul. He'll shortly be named First Consul for life. That'd been one. I didn't even mention it. The big obvious one's the Thermidorian reaction, the end of Robespierre. That's where I believe the revolution ends, because you end from a period where the ever increasing line of more radical people took control and moderates took control, and the craziness kind of ended. Yeah, it's corrupt. The directory is certainly cynical and corrupt, but it's not murdering people. It's not crazy. And then the other one, you could go all the way to say when Napoleon's crowned as emperor. I think that's a stretch. But any of those are logical points. So let's see what people said. Gilly, the Thermidorian reaction. Yep. Gilly don't get a point, though. The end of the War of the First Coalition, which ended when Napoleon did the preliminaries at Leoben and the Treaty of Campo Formio. The directory was already in control, and it's really about what's going on home domestically. So the situation with the directory didn't change then. So that's why it's not a logical point to stop. So, nobody gets a point. I don't believe. Anybody have questions out there? Any other answers out there, actually? No more valid answers. Rocket did not answer. That's correct. The next question. Name someone who was considered by SAS to be the sword other than Napoleon Bonaparte. You can start writing once I press go, but I misspelled Napoleon in there. There we go. Name someone who was considered by SAS to be the sword, other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Rocket is in. Gilly is in. I'll take that, Berlin. 30 seconds left. Name someone who was considered by SAS to be the sword other than Napoleon Bonaparte. Berlin and Mads made a charge near the end of the season. That slate gets wiped clean at the end of the show tonight, and I got a funny feeling that Season 2 is going to have 3 people involved in that leaderboard. Also, thank you for not eating your tacos until we're done, Berlin. The answers. Joubert, obviously, until he died. Moreau, who said, I'm a soldier, not a politician. Bernadotte, even though, well, I can't use that guy, he's a Jacobin. And Jourdan, who also is, I can't use that guy, he's a Jacobin. Bernadotte, I know what you mean. We'll give that one to Gilly. It's Bernadotte, D-O-T-T-E, and the only reason I'm saying that is because he is going to be around a lot during the Empire. The next answer. Moreau, correct. Rocket gets it, and Moreau from Berlin, correct. The what if Joubert hadn't died question, man, it's a great what if. Just SAS would have been in charge, period. But could Joubert have pulled off the second day? He probably wouldn't have done it the same way that Napoleon did. Just one of those ponders. The next question, question number 3 of the final quiz of Season 1. Name the 2 factors which gave the British and Russians the confidence to invade the Batavian Republic. Name the 2 factors which gave the British and the Russians the confidence to invade the Batavian Republic. Rocket is in. 30 seconds. $20 seconds. Gilly is in with 5 seconds. I will admit I stepped the difficulty up in the last quiz of the season. Rocket. William the Orange wanted back in power and they thought the people would rally behind him. That's one thing. Widespread peasant uprisings is a thing. And all those victories in Switzerland and Italy. So got one, not two. Poor intelligence from William the Orange and recent Allied victories in Sweden. Allies hadn't won a thing in Sweden. Switzerland maybe, but not Sweden. Nobody gets that one right. Berlin, victories in Switzerland, and dang. Yep, we didn't write Swiss, and Sweden's a country, Gilly. Name 2 reasons that the invasion of the Batavian Republic failed. That'd be like me saying Chris Columbus landed off islands off South America. Oh, I meant North America. No, it's a place still. It's Sweden in my notes. Bernadotte will be king of Sweden one of these days, but that's down the road a little bit. Thank you for cracking me up. Name 2 reasons that the invasion of the Batavian Republic failed. $20 seconds. Rocket's in. Gilly's in. 5 seconds left. Berlin is in. And the first answer, they came in so fast, I didn't see who. Rocket. The armies couldn't coordinate, and the people rallied with the French. Both good answers. Yes. The Dutch people, but yes. I know who you meant. Rocket gets a point. Gilly, the Dutch were not as willing to join the British as William had reported, and supply lines were cut off due to flooding. Very good. Berlin says Charles and the Russian general were called back. That is not why the Batavian. That was why. No, I'm not going to say why, because maybe it's in a quiz question that's coming up next. Misinformation coming from William of Orange's intelligence. Lack of coordination between the British and the French. Problems with supply lines. Lack of discipline in the armies. Flooding. The Dutch did not rally to the invaders. All good answers there. Maybe. Maybe. I mean, maybe it's this question. Once I correct a typo. What was the key factor in the Allied defeat in the Helvetian Republic? You could probably scroll up and chat and add a couple words to that one. Thank you all for hanging out tonight. There's a lot of people lurking. I do appreciate it. Your interest in history is noted and very much keeps me going. Gilly is in. Rocket is in. 20 seconds left. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Berlin is in with 10 seconds left. Someone said I'm a decent storyteller. I don't know. I know I can put it in terms that make it relatable. I can't remember the spelling of half this stuff. It's okay. Well, you don't say Sweden for Switzerland. I think you're in business. Gilly, the Austrian army was ordered to withdraw before the Russians had arrived to defend Zurich in their place. Yes, that is the crux of it. There was an opening left for Masana. Rocket. Austrian command ordering Charles to pull out and for the Russians to move in, but not on the same day, but immediately. Yes, that's very well put. Berlin. Charles and Suvorov were called back and they left at the same time, leaving Venice open for Nassau. It wasn't Venice, it was Zurich. Charles and Suvorov were called back and they left at the same time. That's a good answer. Leaving Zurich open for Messina. I'm gonna give you it because I know you're just the words, but you got the basic point in there. Yes, I know, Gilly. The next question. And I spelled it wrong. Name a way in which Napoleon Bonaparte almost derailed the coup of Brumaire. Gilly has been locked out. He's in luck. This is my last card. I was like, is that a code mistake by me? No, it's just the apostrophe not being inputted. You can still answer. Manny's in. 30 seconds left. Rocket's in with 15 seconds to go. 4 questions left in the season after this one. Bonus round from Manny. Manny gets 5 if he gets this one right. I'm going to look at your answer now. I'm going to give it to you on that, Manny. 1 second. Let me fix Manny's score here real quick. That'll be that. Save. We're all ready to go. Okay. The first answer comes from Manny. The man had no patience. Manny here is referring to Bonaparte storming into the councils on the second day of the coup. Yes, I'll give you that one. The next answer. He was impatient, tried to subdue the councils to submit. That is correct. Ego about who calls on first and being too impatient at winning before storming the council of 500 in the ages. Got both of them, yes. Because he's got a stockpile of cards, that's why. Gilly, he tried to pressure the council too quickly to create the provincial executive. Yes, but you don't get any points. Next question. Upon his return, what political group in France is the only one which did not solicit Bonaparte to lead their conspiracies? Gilly is in. Rocket is in. 35 seconds left. $20 seconds left. Berlin is in. Thank you guys for participating all season. Berlin more recently. I know that there was a gap in there for the reasons I understand. You guys participating again helps me out a lot. Helps me understand if I've covered things well. So I really do appreciate your interaction as we've gone through this. Even as you gave me the input to refine the quiz. I think it was like episode 8 when we did it. First answer, the monarchists. Correct. The conservatives or the monarchists is a good answer. The next answer from Rocket, the royalists. Yes. Berlin, what did you say? Yeah, I know. I was trying to help Sturf, who has not shown up since. Loyalists, royalists. I had a hard time hearing the word. Royalists. Those who wanted the monarchy back. Conservatives. Clean a potato out of your ear, old man. All right, anybody else answer in there? I don't think so. No, Berlin was last. The next question. 3 left, including this one. Name. I just did it again. I don't know why I wanted to spell that wrong twice tonight. Name 4 of the conspirators in the coup Brumaire. Gilly is in. You're trying to be a completist. You got them all, I think. Yep. I'll take that, Rocket. It's his first name, but I know who you mean. 10 seconds left. Suck it, Berlin. All right, Gilly's answer. The conspirators were both Bonapartes, Lucien and Napoleon, Sayes, Moreau, Fouché, Ducos, Talleyrand, not Barras. I would not have taken him as an answer. Gilly says Lucien Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, Talleyrand, Sayes, Moreau, Fouché, and Ducos. Roger Ducos. Yes, that's correct. Rocket. Napoleon, Sayes, Talleyrand, and Roger Ducos. Yes. That's the end of the answers. I don't think anybody else answered in there. Oh, yeah, we did. Berlin says CS, Talleyrand, Barras. Not really. It won't count that one, so that's 2. Roger, the guy next to CS, so Barras does not count. I said that before I read your answer. So Barras, because he was not really in on it, doesn't get it. Any of the other guys would have worked, Berlin. But good point for saying kind of, because he was brought in to shut up. All right. The 9th and second to the last question of the final quiz of Season 1 is this. Once I fix a typo. One of these days I'm going to proofread these. What was the single greatest purpose behind the intentional design of the consulate? Gilly is in. Rocket is in. That's always been the rule, Richie. As long as I know what they mean, typos don't matter. You know, unless you say Sweden instead of Switzerland. Because that's not really a typo. It's a different country. And you need to add... Your fate is a different country. Berlin, when I get to you, I'll ask you to add before I take your... Actually, Berlin, put your additional stuff in now in chat before I start reading. Berlin's answer is put Sayes in power and give Napoleon a pretty figurehead position. I'll allow you to continue. Keep people as far away from the planning and lawmaking. That's the answer. I'll take that and give you a point when we get there. The answer is this. To keep everyday people as far away from power as possible while making them feel like they had some sort of say. That's the design intent. So who answered first? Put Sayes at the head of a France's government. That was not the intentional design of the consulate. No, sir. to give the people the illusion that they had a say in the matters of politics, but they really weren't. Correct, Rocket. Berlin originally said put Sayes in power and give Napoleon a pretty figurehead position, then added the bit about keeping people away from power but making them feel like they had it. So I would give that to Berlin. Captain Sweden over there didn't get it. Just saying, it's a rebrand opportunity, Gilly. I love you to death, my friend. Anybody else answer in there? I'm going to put the Swedish flag as an emote in the Discord now, just for you. The final question of the season, which maybe was brushed past a little bit, but was not a focus of this episode. Certainly has been a focus of the season. Reach back into your memory from the season and name the 2 policies, when combined, turned the French army into the best fighting force on the continent. Because Napoleon's going to inherit that army. Gilly, right on it. Exactly right. Rocket is in. Yep, kind of ironic that that's the last question then, huh? I want to make sure it sticks. Berlin. Okay, so remember during the time of the Reign of Terror, when France was losing, and Lazare Carnot was handed the keys of the army as one of the members of the Committee of Public Safety. He did 2 things. The first was called the Levée en Masse, which I have harped on as the most important point for the overall structure of the show that you should pull out of here. It stated that the young men will fight, the married men will turn cannon, the women will work as nurses, and the children will pull lint for bandages. Old men will stand on the corners of streets and shout the glorious purpose of the revolution. It industrialized the French nation for war. The second policy is called the amalgame, which, instead of taking batches of raw soldiers and sending them to the front lines as one unit, they were given a partner, a veteran, to fight next to teach them how to be in the army. It is that mass mobilization of state and smart system of bringing new recruits into a veteran army that made them better than anybody else. Gilly's answer. Straight up. Levée en Masse, the amalgame. You knew exactly what I was asking for. Rocket gave me one of them. Everyone participates in making supplies for the army and the Levée en Masse. That was the Levée en Masse. The amalgame is the other part. Berlin. Conscription, career soldiers. Yes, but it's the Levée en Masse is also more than that, as I just went through. So that is the season, everybody. Let's go back to the screens. We've got one more thing to do here.
Let's rock!
As promised, there is a music video for this evening. I showed it to one person beforehand. No one else had seen it. Well, let's have a look back at where we've come from and where we're going to. And I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
remember to clonk that follow button.
To a battle I ride, blazing up to the sky. Chains of fate hold a fiery stride. I see you again when I die. Heroes await me, my enemies ride fast, knowing not this ride's their last. Saddle my horse as I drink my last ale. Bowstring and steel will prevail.
Cover
Let's rock!
That they do. So, no. I contribute to something called the Historical Timeline Project. It's one of those places that I send some of the money because they do good things. I adapted part of the project which I helped fund to be an end video to illustrate something. Yes, they skipped over the whole directory, huh? There's a reason that the directory is important, because it completely sets the stage for Napoleon. Who was Napoleon before Thermidor? Nobody. He had won one significant battle. It's important to explore the directory period, which we just spent the last couple months doing. I wanted to take the effort that I had helped fund and put it to a song, which I enjoyed a whole lot more, which is called The Crown and the Ring by Man of War. It's actually a metal song. Just to run us through the series of events and to refresh your brain about people like Georges Danton and how Camille Desmoulins stood on a table in the Palais Royal and incited the people to go get those guns and push people out of theaters, and the Bastille fell the next day. It felt like a fitting end cap without having to go into too much time to produce my own video, to be quite honest. It actually is a piece together of two projects because they consider the directory to be a different piece of history, and that's fine. But I wanted... Well, Danton isn't a complete innocent guy, let's be fair. Lafayette got done dirty, that's for sure. That dude is the most optimistic, virtuous guy in the whole story. He'll be back. But we are also done. Again, I cannot express my thanks enough for everyone's just enthusiasm, participation, support, both monetarily, with your time and attention, with your skills and talents, with your ears that I have bent. And no, Mads was not the person that I showed the video to. You guys have a great 6 weeks. I will be taking a step back to just veg for a week before I pull out the notebook to begin mapping out how I want to approach Napoleon. The knowledge is in my head. I just have to put it on paper, and I need to organize it. August 13th, tentatively, is when I plan to start Season 2. I hope you've all enjoyed this, enjoyed learning the past and how it absolutely has impacted your current life. And with that, we'll get out of here.
It is time.
Follow my friend on Dustin and pick him up Monday morning at 7:30 a.m. Monday through Friday until 10:30 a.m. Then my good friend Permadu, who is playing Dwerve. I missed him all week because I was in the office. You're welcome, Rocket. He streams from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then there is the Gilius. Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday now, I think, is his schedule, playing Bloodborne. He's trying to finish it. Good luck. 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and then Intent Rocket. I think it's on the weekends right now due to her work schedule, but she still streams whenever the hell she feels like it. Give her a follow as well. She's playing The Last of Us Part 2. And then my sincere end-of-season thanks to my good friend CF Live for all the work you've done in the background that no one saw to help me get the music and even my microphone working correctly. Remember that? Give that man a follow. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, streaming music for you. And then Mr. Landiggity, who is busy this evening. As Fish is up there visiting. We missed you both. I hope you're having a blast. He's a great streamer. Give him a follow as well. We're out of here. Have a great summer.
Be excellent to each other.